For the artists, for the passionate. Welcome to the Adventures Elsewhere podcast. Hello everyone and welcome back to the Adventures Elsewhere podcast. I am your host, Jade Black, and today I am continuing with the emotion sub-mini series thing I've got going. And I'm talking about anger while listening to a song called Joy. So yeah, there are a few episodes I have planned for this, I believe 5 at the moment, but there may or may not be more coming for that, so stay tuned, either way. Because this is arguably somewhat more of a craft-based episode, I feel the need to say, regardless, little disclaimer, I'm not here to give writing advice. I'm here to talk about my craft, my process, what works for me, all that jazz. That's it. That's the deal. Right. Oh boy, where do we start with this one? Let's talk about work making people angry. Because this is more of a when you get overworked or you end up saddled with work that isn't really your forte or that should have been given to somebody else and isn't for no apparent reason. And this particularly gets Hanzo's goat. We see this in the early portion of Snakebite, that he has a lot of this nonsense to deal with. And work in general does a lot of the time just annoy him because he ends up dealing with a lot of things. He's just like, okay, but why is this an issue to begin with? And I very much has the same thing. I shouldn't have to deal with this issue because it shouldn't be an issue in the first place. And with someone like I, who ends up saddled with trade later on in the timeline, it's like, well, this is not something I've ever really specialised in, and also IES and maths don't generally go together all that well, so he doesn't... That's just, to him, saddling him with that is a really stupid decision, and he's aware he's not good at it, and it makes him very angry. I mean, I think it goes without saying that this is also going to anger Helga, because, again, she just ends up doing a lot of stuff that a lot of people just don't see the need to do, and she doesn't understand why they don't see the need to do these things. She's just like, okay, but why am I the only person who can actually be bothered to deal with this thing? Especially when Helga's had a limited education, and the way that impacts a lot of the things she does and has to do. She's like, I'm not technically really... I don't have the knowledge I need for this, but yet I have to do this, and it's stupid and it makes me angry. Keeping on the thread of that, really, let's talk about incompetence. And this is something that gets the goat of just about every determined one, with the exception of Isamu, and the only reason this doesn't bother Isamu is because he doesn't really have to work with anybody else, and so it just doesn't... Other people's incompetence, generally speaking, just doesn't really affect him. If it did affect him, it would definitely annoy him, but that's not the scenario we're in. So with Hanzo, a lot of the reason he ends up doing other people's work is because of incompetence, so it very much feeds into that. But also, when it's like trying to push bills through the Senate and stuff like that, he often gets asked a lot of questions about things that do come from a place of ignorance and or incompetence, or gets objections to things based on just ignorance and incompetence. And it's hard to annoy him more efficiently than doing that. I has exactly the same thing. Helga, again, has pretty much the same thing with that. It's just why do I have to handhold these people who have more of an education and are more specialist than me into actually doing their job a lot of the time for Helga? And why can't they just do the thing? I mean, there's one character in particular where it's like, okay, you are an expert at this and you could easily have had this done a lot sooner. Why didn't you? This is just ridiculous. Shinichi gets a real bugbear with incompetence as well. I mean, the whole being in a war thing doesn't help with that. But as a soldier, it's like, well, okay. There is a war. There's been a war looming for a while. Everybody within the military and people who have recently signed up to the military are very aware of that. If you have not put in the effort to be at least competent at being a soldier, why are you here? What is the point? What is wrong with you? It's very much that for Shinichi. And it's not like Hyuki's army training is not good. It's very, very good. People are very aware across the continent of how good Hyuki's army training is, especially post-downfall. Haru, this is one of the few things that can actually anger Haru. Like, it takes a lot to make Haru angry, but incompetence is one of those things. Like, after a while of him being saddled with trade, he does get annoyed about it because, again, it's not his strong point. Why is someone incompetent enough to give me this job? That doesn't make sense on really any level. And when it comes to incompetence with people, I mean, I think doctors the big one for Haru because he's had a lot of nonsense with doctors just not really taking him seriously. And what that results in later in the timeline does make him really angry because it's like this one really basic oversight it's just sheer incompetence. Somebody could have saved me a lot of, trouble and physical pain if they weren't just so incompetent and useless that they didn't even think to do this like really basic check, and basically what the fuck is that? Incompetence is one of those things that really gets Coney's goat as well, which is more of a thing towards his peers, I think, because Coney isn't that high level in the politics sphere. Diplomat is one rung above assistant. It's not exactly a position of pride. And to him, it's not necessarily that much hard work. I mean, doing the face-to-face international meetings, sure, but a lot of the paperwork and stuff like that is not that difficult so long as you know how to formulate a good formal letter and you know what you're talking about. And especially the assistant job is not that difficult. So Coney seeing people just like complaining and failing at that does just annoy him because it's like, okay, I am stuck in this sort of position, yet everybody else I am working with is crap at their job, and I suspect a lot of people above me are no better. Like, why am I stuck here in this position? And also, why do any of these people work here when they're all useless? Something I'm sure that many of us can relate to. Incompetence really gets Curtis as well, because where he works, it's all very much, if we fuck up, Malazzo is in big trouble. And there are a lot of people who their attention to detail is not great, and they miss things, and to him that's just like really basic. Okay, do you not realize the gravity of the situation and your job? And because again, the blame doesn't necessarily fall on their heads, and some of them are quite aware of that. The blame falls on him, really, if they screw up. And yeah, Angry Curtis is not somebody you want to run into, oh boy. So let's talk about society, and this is more the state of society and how apathetic they can be and all those sorts of things. So for it's definitely the apathy that bothers him, because he does do a lot of work in human rights and campaigning and all that sort of stuff. And seeing people just not care, but particularly with issues around children's rights, that's something that has a lot of big feelings about. Not that, he has feelings, but he does a lot of awareness campaigns and a lot of work towards, trying to get kids in orphanages, better resources, better opportunities, and things like that. And some of that is about, doing crowdfunding and public events. Seeing people not engage with that and just saying, oh, well, that's an issue somewhere else, that really annoys him, particularly in a nation like UK where adoption is a big issue. And a lot of that, you would think, post-downfall, that was a big problem because, so many people were killed in the whole genocide thing, so that made sense. But it's kind of an issue that's perpetuated in UK because, as much as anything, the war had a similar effect on a lot of kids. Their parents both went to war, or at least one of them did, and then those parents die, and the knock-on effects of all that. And it's actually a lot bigger of an issue in UK than a lot of people realise. But a lot of people just don't really want to think about it. And that really annoys I. With Helga, it's just the state of, I think, more of the international society where it's like, okay, but her people, there's an illusion about South Fjordavik that, they're just these tough, rugged, Viking-y type people and, nothing gets to them. It's like, actually, they're not in a good spot. Like, when the land was divided towards the end of the downfall, the South Fjordavans got the worst deal out of everybody. Because they got saddled with this northern hunk. It's a big hunk of land, sure, it's one of the biggest nations by landmass, there's no doubt about that. Like, by landmass, they're probably bigger than Malasau. And Malasau's big. But about half of it, the northern half, is not inhabitable, it's too cold. The environment is too harsh. You can't really live there, especially not inland. On the coast you could maybe make an argument because, you could at least eat fish, but, you couldn't realistically live there for any extended period of time. And the weather there, regardless, is so harsh, you can. And it's not that unusual to get snow in, like, June in South Fjordavik. So, they can and do grow some crops, but what they can grow is limited. And with the weather being the way it is, how bountiful those yields are is generally not great and definitely variable. And the fact that nobody really wants to help the South Fjordavans with that, the fact that he's like, oh yeah, you got a huge hunk of land, what are you whining about, is kind of the international deal there. And it's like, well, we are starving, like, all the time. We never really have enough food to go round. And for some reason everybody's just okay with that. I mean, if you're leading that nation and that doesn't piss you off, you are not a good leader. Hanzo has both of the issues that I and Helga has, in the sense that with the Hukis, they face a lot of, very imminent, genocide type dangers, and people don't really want to help with that. When the war starts for them, there's another war going on at the same time, which is Harai Soleil. So it's like, okay, yeah, they've got their own shit to deal with. I can't really judge them for that. But then there's Liera, who are sort of there as well. And Liera decide, we'll pledge help to Harai, but not Yukai. And there's absolutely no reason the biggest nation on the continent by landmass and population, can't give help to both. They say they can't, but it's no secret that that's just not true. And nobody in the international society really holds them accountable to that, because, but look, they're helping these other people, and, help thy neighbour, and virtue signalling, look, they can't help, they can't possibly do both, and, because Hanzo knows more numbers than he should, basically. He knows full well that's not true. And that really bugs him. And again, with a lot of public campaigning, particularly with Hanzo, it's more of an economics thing, with how many people think, having massive economic crashes and everything is just completely inevitable and it just happens and there's not really anything you can do to lessen the impact. And Hanzo's like, come on, economics is a subject in school that, not everybody studies, sure, but you at least get a lowdown of economics, and enough people study it that they should not believe this. What is wrong with all of you? Particularly the people, his colleagues, like, what is wrong with all of you people? You are in power, you should A, know better than this, and B, be fucking doing something. Why is that all falling on me? I'm only one person, I can't do all of that. But let's move on to politics in general, because I did touch on this already, but just the fact that politics gets in the way of so much of daily life and people's work. That's more what I'm touching on, is the sort of daily life aspect of things. And Hanzo definitely gets really annoyed about this. I mean, he is in high-level politics, so it's pretty much bound to annoy him a bit more. About, when he can and can't submit bills to the Senate and how he has to be so careful about that. And it's like, look, I'm not going to submit a bill to the Senate if it's not about something that matters and something that needs fixing. I should be able to submit that whenever, get it debated, and get it, at least taken seriously regardless of what's going on. That shouldn't be a thing. Haru very much shares that as well. In the sense that, okay, so I just can't submit this bill about this thing because it's an important time for religion, apparently, because, my sister knows more about that than I do. So if I bring up this issue that the church have a big sway in, like, now is just not the time, and that's just dumb. Hanzo definitely feels the daily life side of politics more than Haru does, though, because he's actually been really fucked over in his personal life one time by a very political decision that was made on someone else's behalf. I'm trying to do this without spoilers, if you can't tell. Basically, someone was forced away from him because it didn't look good that he and this other person had any kind of relationship. Which was questionable anyway, given that Hanzo is a senior politician. It's very questionable that that's even true, but... So yeah, Hanzo doesn't like that. At the time, he was more sad than angry, but looking back on it, it's definitely like, come on, this is bullshit. The fact that politics exists, I mean, I'm pretty sure I've mentioned Helga. Yeah, I have mentioned Helga for every point, but this really, really gets her being on the leading council, and how much politicking there is within the leading council of Southfieldavik as well, in the sense that, okay, I'm just not supposed to step on this guy's toes, even though he is doing nothing to help us, not die. He's doing nothing about that, and yet I'm just not supposed to step on his toes. Is that because I'm newer to the council, or because I'm a woman, or is it both? Either way, it's stupid, and this guy should actually be held accountable, but there's nothing I can really do about that. And again, if that doesn't make you angry as a leader, you're not being a good leader. The fact that how I shares Haru and Hanzo's thing with bills in the Senate. I mean, the religious side of it, I think, does impact him a bit more with the exact work he does. I mean, children's rights is something that, while the church doesn't have a huge presence in Hukai, it didn't really originate there and it was kind of foisted upon them. for certain issues, they're kind of the vocal minority. They shout very, very loud, and because they're so vocal about it, that means a lot of the senators think that's what the majority of the public think, and whether that's true or not is highly debatable, but it does impact a lot of what I does, and he gets very, very angry about that. Politics does also really annoy Coney for some of the same reasons when it comes to the church interfering. Coney doesn't have power in the Senate, so I'm sure he is aware of a lot of the nonsense around that because he'll have heard a lot about it just, in conversation. And it does bug him, but I think the main thing with politics for him is how much he has personally been fucked over by politics. Because it's like, okay, but you're in this particularly unique situation in the early part of your life that nobody's really thought about because it is actually just genuinely an odd situation to be in. There's not really much, if any, precedent for this, at least not, post Great Burning. So we don't know what to do with you, so you're just going to get no help. And you're just kind of expected to be okay with that. We don't know what to do, so we'll just give you nothing. He does also get very annoyed by international politics as well, and how much, most nations can sort of agree on one issue and the standpoint on it and the solution to the one issue, but basically if someone like Liera oppose, there's not necessarily much people can do about that. I don't know much about how international law is made and the process for that, but with Liera being, the massive trade power as much as anything as they are, it's sort of like, okay, we don't like this decision that these 5 other nations have made, so we're just going to stop exporting to you and, see if you can still, live. Or, we could just, brush this law under the carpet. Up to you. What decision do you think is best here? I think the international law side of things bugs Coney probably more than any part of politics, and it's definitely something that Haru runs into and gets very annoyed about as well. And oh boy, you just don't even want to talk to him about that. So somewhat keeping on the society thread, let's talk about expectations. So I've split this somewhat into 2 categories, so this being society's expectations on people, but also family expectations. Let's talk about society's expectations first. So this is obviously something that's going to get Helga as a woman, because, women in South Fjordvik, oh boy, they're not really supposed to... It's sort of they're not seen but not heard thing, but also we don't really want to see you either. And for someone like Helga, no. That's never going to work, especially being on the leading council. Nobody's really sure how to handle that. The fact that she does genuinely deserve a place on the leading council, that's never happened in South Fjordvik short history, and probably not in their indigenous lands as well. That's probably never happened within their society. Arman is like the only guy who's just like, what, she's just a member of the leading council, why does it matter that she's a woman? Just like, guys, come on. Because, Arman is sane. There's also a very big expectation on anybody important in South Fjordvik to have kids. And Helga, for just all kinds of reasons, is just not interested in that. And in the end, she never did. And some people are... They would never say it, but it's not the secret that they're funny about it with her. And this is actually something that Arman runs into as well, because he doesn't have kids. And he is absolutely, for multiple reasons, someone that everybody wanted to have kids. And now he's like in his 80s or something. It's not happening. Let's be real. And to be honest, I think Helga and Arman are probably, much as they hate the standpoint, they're probably a little bit disappointed in each other on that one as well. expectations are something that really gets to Curtis as well, be that society's, underlying expectation that, he has to be perfect. As a king, like, you have to be perfect, and, that's just not realistic, everybody's human. That gets him. But there's also the expectation from his parents about the sort of person they want him to be, and the skills they expect him to have, and that is so at odds with what Curtis wants the vast majority of the time that, it's just natural, that's going to get on your nerves. But Curtis gets annoyed with some of the expectations he has of himself as well, because he does very much feel the need to be perfect. And that, even within himself, he finds that incredibly annoying, because it's like, well, it's just not possible. And also, yes, I'm the king, and yes, it matters if I make a mistake, it really does. But there should also be some leeway somewhere, for me being a human, and that should at least somewhat come from within. I should be able to make allowances for myself, and it's not something he's good at. I very much struggles with the expectations that his parents put on him. This isn't so much of his dad thing, because his dad wasn't around very much. But there was a big expectation for him to, go to church every week and, you follow this path in life. I mean, one of the things that was really pushed onto him was that he should follow a more feminine path in life, which is basically because his mum wishes that he had been a daughter instead of a son. So she sort of tried to mould him a bit more that way, and that's not what he wants. And this whole expectation that you go to church and you must believe, and it's sort of like, he didn't question religion that much, but at the same time, he was always aware he didn't really believe in it. Sort of like, oh yeah, it's a nice collection of stories, but it's kind of as far as it goes, and that's kind of the deal. I guess he was just very agnostic for a long time. It's like, oh, maybe, but whatever. Didn't really take it that seriously. And then, the whole war thing happened, and he's like, yeah, no, actually. Definitely not. All of this is nonsense, and what the fuck, by the way. I think Haru does, earlier on in the timeline, get frustrated by society's expectations as well, because he does face some pressure to get married and to look after his sister's children. He's like, excuse me, they're your children, they're your responsibility. But he knows the line that's trotted out is going to be, oh, well, but it's good practice for you, and you eventually have them. He's like, no thanks, I hate kids, I don't really want to be anywhere near them at any given moment, just like, no thank you. And the whole pressure to get married thing as well, it's like, well, I'd like to, but I can't, because, it's illegal for me, being a gay man, that it's not legal. And also, the whole idea to him that you're supposed to get married really at the latest by 25 is also like, well, no, thank you. What if it takes a little bit longer than that? Why is that wrong? And for Haru, I don't know that he was really thinking that much about serious relationships at that point. I think Hanzo with expectations is more with politicians. He actively challenges this a lot. He gets annoyed that the expectation that all politicians have to be sort of the grey man, the invisible, sort of generic grey man in a grey suit, doing X thing, and you have to do everything this way, and he doesn't want to be that guy. He finds it annoying that people, particularly early in his career, tried to push him into that, and he's like, well, what's the point in that? What's the point in politicians being these far off, people that don't really exist and sort of disappear when you walk away from them? Who does that help? If you actually are human, surely that counts for something. Surely that means something, instead of, just being whoever the fuck that guy is. let's go on to family trouble. And they've split this a little bit into blood family and found family for characters that have that. So with Curtis and family trouble, I did touch on this earlier with expectations and him and his parents. Like, there's a lot of anger that stems at him for that, because I think the thing with him is that if there's big family trouble, as opposed to them getting annoyed that he likes mythology more than, religion, like, that's sort of one of those things that, with Malazar being such a heavily atheist nation and being so against the church as they are, like, that doesn't necessarily matter. But if there's like a big family issue, what that means for, the public of Malazar, and how potentially they view him, can be a big problem. But also what that potentially means outright for the future. And it's like, well, they do technically have the power to strip him of being an heir. And then there is another blood relative out there, and it's like, for him it's okay, but this guy is not competent. And if they don't go to him, then who the hell do they go to? And oh my god, what is that going to end up being? Is something that, they don't have to deal with, so. But it ends up being my problem. So he ends up in this really weird position of, okay, if I am like my parents, I am dooming my nation. But if I'm too obviously against them, against their wishes and everything, then what does that mean for anybody? That can also doom my nation. So either way, he's really stuck, and it gets him, understandably very angry for all of those reasons and more. Family trouble is one of those things that really angers Haru as well, in the sense that the relationship some of his sisters have with his parents is not great, and that is enough to annoy him, because it's like, well, they were great parents. Why are you being antagonistic towards them? Why are you doing that? That's just ridiculous. With family trouble, it's very much that, his mother and brother were they're not nice people. And that's enough. Like, the way they treat him is worth a mention on its own. But then he does take issue with his dad in this one as well. Because, like, yeah, I know you weren't around much, but don't you think when you were around, you should have done a bit more about this? This is maybe a bit less of a thing when I gets older, because he's aware that actually it's a lot more complicated than that. But especially when he's a kid, it's just like, well, why aren't you doing anything about this? You could do more about this if you wanted to. But when it comes to Jiro, this is more of a found family thing. He's kind of on his own on this one, because with the whole found family sort of network thing that he's in, there isn't much trouble. They all get along very well, it's very tight-knit, but when there are issues, that just makes him really angry, because I think it's somewhat of a trauma response to him from not wanting to lose these people he cares about so much, but a lot of the issues do stem from the one person. And when people oppose that one person who he loves as much as he does, it makes him, the concept of that makes him angry. Jiro is not right. As a person, that he has issues, and this is a moment where it really shows. So let's move on to another really happy topic, and let's talk about oppression. And again, this is one I have split into oppression within society and oppression of the characters themselves. So let's talk about oppression within society first, and this is something that absolutely enrages Haru. This is the one thing that really gets him really quickly, is the sense that anybody should be oppressed for, just existing, be that about, the colour of their skin, their sexuality, anything. To him, it's just like, this is unfathomable that this would ever be considered okay. And that's, the main reason he goes into human rights is because how angry it makes him, and what makes him even more angry about it is that he doesn't really see many people doing much about it, and only really sees people trying to make it worse. And this is very much I as well, as just this overwhelming anger about it, just like, but why are people perpetuating this? Why are people not helping? And that is kind of the driving force behind Black Executioner. It makes I do what he does in that book. It's just all the anger he has pent up and all the things he's tried that hasn't worked and the cumulative build up, and it's like, well, just, fuck everything. I'm gonna, just throw everything that I shouldn't throw at this, because at some point somebody has to listen. If this is the only way it's gonna work, then fuck it. And while Hanzo doesn't work in human rights so much, this is also something that really gets to him, because while he is technically oppressed by, the whole we don't like the gays law thing, he doesn't really let that get in his way, but he sees it getting in the way of other people and what that does to them, and that really annoys him. I think another thing that really gets Hanzo is it's in very particular places. So there are bits of classism, and while that's really quite rare in Hyukai, I feel like, I might be wrong because I haven't run into it that much, but bits of that really get to him, and a lot of stuff around adoption really gets to him, and effectively it's sort of very quiet oppression with adoption prioritization and exactly how that looks, and it's like, okay, but really this is just you wanting to prevent this certain group of people from being able to have children in any way. This is just very hidden oppression that nobody's talking about, and this is just not okay in any way. And with Curtis, he really makes a lot of effort with oppression as well, both nationally and internationally. One of the things that Curtis really notices is things like caring for refugees and people like that, because, this is something that he sees from a young age in the era, that there are refugees there who are just not getting the help they need, and he's like, okay, but if you're going to take these people, and they're coming with nothing from horrible situations, and what they need, what the basic needs are, that's an economic concept of needs that in today's society is being vastly challenged with things, attempting to be added to them. But if you take the more primitive version of that, though that's still questionable even in a society like theirs, what those needs are. That is an established economic concept and has been for a very long time. And you're ignoring at least half, if not just outright all of them, when these people are coming and what they need. What is the point in that? What do you gain from that? Does it just look like you're taking these refugees on the international stage and, oh look, I'm such a good person? But if anybody actually looks at that for 2 seconds, they'll realise how false that is. And another thing Curtis in particular really champions is, all the stuff around ableism and disabled people. And he's like, this is something that needs a lot more attention. And that might be him with a bit of a military background and seeing, people who have lost arms and hands and fingers, and the fact that there's not much support there, particularly under his parents' reign, for people like that. And he's like, this is, hang on, we can't have that. And he's not seeing enough being done about that internationally either. That is something that is lacking, for sure. And he really makes a lot of pushes towards that, and is met with a lot of opposition. And, oh boy, you don't want to be around angry Curtis. I'm pretty sure I said that earlier, but it's worth reiterating. You don't. Oppression of the self And you might be surprised to see how thin on the ground this list is, but this isn't something that makes everybody angry so much as, particularly with Haru, the way he is oppressed doesn't necessarily make him angry, it more makes him sad than angry. So he doesn't really belong on this particular list. It definitely makes Coney very sad, though, the fact that he is, oppressed just for, existing. He's like, okay, but how is this fair in any way? And, the one time I actually get anywhere, I have to watch everyone and everything around me and myself like a fucking hawk to even, have a chance of not dying. Like, how fucked up is that? And it's not like I'm a senior politician or anybody who deserves a lot of scrutiny. I'm pretty much just a paper pusher, and this is how I have to act all the time. And again, if that's for Haru, it just, that same reality pretty much just makes him incredibly sad instead of incredibly angry, but that's just those two. Coney has more of a temper than I expected him to have, but given who all his relatives are, maybe I shouldn't be surprised. While it might be odd to say Helga is oppressed as being on the leading council, there is the whole, being a woman in South Fjordvik thing, and again, that just makes her really angry, because it's like, well, especially because Arman treats her, as, people should, he's just, okay, you're just a person, let's just talk like ordinary, like, I will talk to you like you are a human being, and you talk to me like I am a human being, and, that's just, is it really that hard? Particularly seeing how simple and easy he makes that, the way other people treat her, be that with, just straight up unease, or very slight, what's the word I'm looking for? Subtle disrespect. To her, it's like, well, what's the reason for that, with me being a woman? Starters, like, what the fuck is that? But also, like, I am on the leading council. You do not get to treat me like this. And, there are fingers cut off because of this. She's not shy to teach people a lesson about that, but that doesn't mean it doesn't still happen, because, there's always that one guy who's like, oh, well, it never happened to me. So it's something that, could she ever fully stamp that out? I mean, within her lifetime, no, absolutely not. For someone like being a bisexual man, it's kind of slightly different for him. Because for a long time, he wasn't really okay with his sexuality. Yay, religious upbringing, we love that. But, also he was married at a really young age, so for the most part, he kind of felt like it didn't affect him. So it's like, okay, well, there is this whole deal, but also I'm married, so maybe I've kind of just, this isn't really a problem for me. But then later on, after, he gets divorced and all that, it does become a pertinent issue for him. And particularly seeing Haru being oppressed like that really gets him, because it's like, but he's so nice and sweet and just such a good person, why would you do that to him? And Coney as well, he feels exactly the same about, he's just a kind and sweet person, why? So then failure is the one I like to touch on in all of these episodes, because, never give up and succeed is such a big theme in the Determined ones. Failure, again, doesn't make everybody angry. It's, for a lot of people, it makes them sad instead. For Helga and Hanzo, though, it is very much an anger thing. With both of them, because, generally it's about very important issues that really need fixing, and if other people can't accept that, and those things sort of fall by the wayside because of it, as leaders, if that doesn't make you angry, you're not a good leader, is the deal. That's kind of within their nature. And them failing things even within themselves, they don't have very much patience with themselves, I don't think. I mean, Helga definitely doesn't. If she doesn't get things quickly, she gets very angry with herself about that. Especially, I think, for them it's compounded by the fact that if those two in particular fail, the consequences of that are really quite big. So anger is almost the coping mechanism, because if they're angry, that's somehow easier to deal with than thinking about the void of consequences they are staring into, and that because they failed they can't necessarily do something about that, but it's all still going to be piled on them as their fault. And on that happy note, I think that's about all I have for today. So let's actually talk about something happy this time, instead of me saying, oh, let's be happy and talk about genocide. Let's talk about if you're published or well on the way. Get in touch. I'd like to talk to you. You can do that via email. That's jade42black@gmail.com. There is a list of things I want to know in your initial email in the description. Please read that first, so that if and when I get inundated, I don't have to give automatic no's. That's no good for anybody, especially not you. So do that. Worth noting, indie and self-pub, you are the people I want to hear from the most. Doesn't have to be any particular age category, doesn't have to be any particular genre, doesn't have to be a novel. Anthologies, short stories, poetry, novellas, overview of a trilogy or something. Whatever, bring it in. Why not? What's the worst that can happen? If you're looking to find me elsewhere, if you're looking in particular for the home of the podcast, which you probably are if you're here, that is Instagram, jade_black21. On there you will get advance notice of what the week's episode is, little soundbite teaser reels, and other things as and when I experiment with them. There's more happening on there than there has been ever before at this point, and by the time this episode gets uploaded there might well be even more stuff going on there, so make sure you check it out if you are enjoying this podcast. If you'd like to know more about my writing and all these very angry people who go against society's expectations and all of those things, Twitter's the place for that, JadeBlack21. But that's about all for now, so you have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you for listening. If you've enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing so you don't miss future content. Copyright Jade Black 2023.